Everyone gave up on the alien queen, except one man who carried her to safety. Blood and starlight. The silence that followed the battle was more deafening than the chaos that preceded it. Marcus Vale pressed his back against the twisted remains of what had once been a transport vehicle, his medic's instincts automatically cataloging the wounds across his body. 3 cracked ribs, a gash along his left forearm, and exhaustion that ran bone deep. Around him, the battlefield stretched like a graveyard of failed dreams, human and alien bodies scattered across the scarred earth like broken dolls. He should have been dead. By all rights, the plasma blast that had vaporized his unit should have taken him too. Instead, fate had seen fit to leave him as the sole witness to humanity's final gambit. A desperate last stand that had cost everything and gained nothing. The acrid smell of burned metal and worse things filled his nostrils, mixing with the strange ozone-esque scent that always lingered after alien weapons fire. Marcus forced himself to move, his medic training overriding the voice in his head that whispered about the futility of it all. There might be survivors. There had to be survivors. He stumbled through the debris, checking pulse points on bodies that had grown cold, searching for any sign of life among the carnage. It was during this grim inventory that he saw her. She lay partially hidden beneath a collapsed piece of their aircraft's wing, her form so still that he almost passed her by entirely. But something made him stop. Perhaps the way the dying light caught on fabric that seemed to shift and shimmer like captured aurora. Or maybe it was the faint rhythmic glow that pulsed beneath her skin like a distant heartbeat. Whatever it was, Marcus found himself kneeling beside her, his hands already reaching for his medical kit before his conscious mind had fully processed what he was seeing. She was beautiful in a way that defied human understanding. Her skin held, the pale luminescence of moonlight on water, marked here and there with intricate patterns that looked like tattoos but moved subtly, as if alive. Her hair fell in waves of silver white around a face that was both alien and achingly familiar. As if he'd seen her in dreams he couldn't quite remember, but it was her injuries that captured his attention. A deep wound in her side leaked fluid that gleamed like liquid starlight, and her breathing came in shallow, labored gasps. "Easy," Marcus murmured, his voice hoarse from smoke and shouting. "Easy there." He didn't know if she could understand him, didn't even know if she was conscious, but talking had always helped him focus during medical emergencies. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, assessing the damage while his mind raced. The wound was bad, but not immediately fatal if treated properly. The real question was whether human medical supplies would have any effect on alien physiology, as yea. He worked to clean the wound. Her eyes fluttered open, large violet-hued orbs that seemed to hold depths like looking into deep space. They fixed on his face with an intensity that made his breath catch. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then her lips parted and she spoke in a voice like wind chimes and distant thunder, words in a language that sounded like music, given form. "I don't understand," Marcus said softly, continuing to work on her wound. "But you're hurt and I'm going to help you. That's what I do. I help people." He paused, studying her face. "Even if we were trying to kill each other a few hours ago." Something in his tone seemed to reach her. The tension in her body eased slightly, and she watched him work with eyes that held a spark of recognition. Trust, maybe, or at least the absence of immediate fear. Marcus took it as a good sign and continued his ministrations, using his limited supplies to clean and dress her wound as best he could. It was only as he helped her sit up that he noticed the weight of metal around her neck, an intricate collar of what looked like woven starlight and precious metals, adorned with symbols that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. A crown of sorts, he realized, or at least a mark of significant rank. His hands stilled as the implications hit him. "You're important," he said, more to himself than to her. "Really important." He looked around at the battlefield with new eyes, noting details he'd missed before. The way the alien bodies seemed to be arranged in defensive formations around her position, the quality of their armor, the sophistication of their weapons. This hadn't just been a battle, it had been a rescue attempt. Or perhaps an evacuation gone wrong. She followed his gaze, and he saw her shoulders slump as she took in the full scope of the devastation. When she turned back to him, there were tears in those impossible eyes, and she spoke again in her musical language. This time, though, he caught something familiar in the cadence. Grief, he thought. Loss. The universal language of mourning. Marcus made his decision without really thinking about it. Maybe it was the medic's oath he'd taken years ago, or maybe it was simple human decency. More likely it was something about the way she looked at him, as if he was the last solid thing in a world gone mad. Whatever the reason, he found himself gathering her carefully into his arms, ignoring the protest from his own injuries. "Can't leave you here," he said, adjusting his grip so he wouldn't aggravate her wound. "Not like this." She was lighter than he'd expected. Her bones seemingly hollow like a bird's, but there was strength in her frame that spoke of hidden power. "I don't know where we're going, but anywhere has to be better than here." She said something else, her voice weak but urgent, and gestured toward the horizon where mountains rose like jagged teeth against the darkening sky. Marcus nodded, understanding the gesture if not the words. Direction, purpose, a destination that meant something to her. The first few miles were the hardest. Marcus's body screamed in protest with every step, his cracked ribs sending sharp spikes of pain through his chest whenever he breathed too deeply. The woman in his arms drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes mumbling in her alien tongue, other times simply watching the landscape pass with those remarkable eyes. He found himself talking to her as they walked, partly to keep himself alert and partly because the silence felt too heavy. "Name's Marcus," he said as they navigated around a crater that still glowed with residual energy. "Marcus Vale, combat medic, 3rd Colonial Marines. Or was, anyway. Don't think there's much of a 3rd Colonial left to be medic for." He paused to catch his breath, looking down at her face. "What about you? What do I call you?" She stirred in his arms, meeting his gaze. For a moment, she seemed to struggle with something. Then she pressed a hand to her chest and spoke a single word that sounded like wind through crystal caves. "Zephyra." "Zephyra," Marcus repeated, tasting the foreign syllables. "Pretty name. Fits you." He resumed walking, his stride finding a rhythm that accommodated both their injuries. "Nice to meet you, Zephyra, under the circumstances." The landscape around them began to change as they walked, the scorched battlefield giving way to rougher terrain. Rocks jutted from the earth like broken bones, and scrubby vegetation clung to life in patches of shadow and moisture. The twin suns were setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that looked almost normal until Marcus remembered he wasn't on Earth anymore. This was one of the outer colonies, a world humanity had claimed and tried to terraform before the war came calling. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped sharply. Marcus found shelter in a shallow cave, formed by fallen rocks, carefully lowering Zephyra to the ground and checking her bandages by the light of his flashlight. The wound was holding, but she was pale, or paler than usual, and her breathing remained labored. "Need to get you somewhere with proper medical facilities," he murmured, though they both knew the chances of finding such a place were slim. The nearest human settlement was hundreds of miles away, and he had no idea where her people might be. For all he knew, they were the last 2 living beings on this entire planet. Zephyra reached up and touched his face, her fingers cool against his skin. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, but he caught something new in her tone. Gratitude, perhaps, or maybe just recognition of the choice he'd made. She pressed something into his palm, and by flashlight he saw it was a small crystal that pulsed with the same inner light as her collar. "Thank you," she said in heavily accented but unmistakable English. Marcus stared at her, then at the crystal, then back at her face. "You understand me. You've understood me this whole time." She nodded slowly. "Some. Learning. Your thoughts. They sing loud." Sing loud? Marcus frowned, then decided it didn't matter. What mattered was that they could communicate, that she was conscious and alert and apparently stronger than she looked. "How far to your people? Can you make it?" Zephyra closed her eyes, and for a moment the patterns on her skin flared brighter. "Far," she said finally. "Many days." "But—" She opened her eyes and looked directly at him. "You carry me this far. Why?" It was a simple question with a complicated answer. Marcus considered it as he settled beside her, sharing what warmth they had in the cooling night air. Why had he saved her? Why was he risking everything for someone he'd been fighting just hours before? "Because," he said finally, "someone should have." She smiled then, the first time he'd seen her do it, and the expression transformed her face entirely. For just a moment she didn't look alien at all, just a woman, hurt and grateful and maybe a little bit hopeful. "Tomorrow," she said softly. "We walk tomorrow, together." Marcus nodded, pulling his jacket tighter around both of them. Tomorrow they would walk, and the day after that, and however many days it took to get her home. He didn't know what waited for them at the end of this journey, didn't know if her people would welcome him or kill him on sight. All he knew was that he'd made a choice back on that battlefield, and he was going to see it through to the end, whatever that end might be. Crown of Two Worlds. The city of Lumenspire rose from the valley floor like a living constellation, its crystalline towers reaching toward the heavens with an organic grace that defied human architectural understanding. Marcus Vale stood at the ridge's edge, still supporting Zephyra's weight, though she had grown stronger with each passing day of their 2-week journey. The sight before him stole what little breath his cracked ribs had left him. "Your home?" he asked, though the reverence in Zephyra's expression had already given him the answer. "The heart of our realm," she replied, her English improving with each conversation they shared. The patterns on her skin pulsed brighter as they approached, responding to some unseen energy that permeated the air around the city. "My people, they will be surprised." That, Marcus thought grimly, was probably an understatement. He was a human soldier carrying their wounded leader home after a battle that had likely left thousands dead on both sides. Surprise didn't begin to cover what their reception might be. As they descended into the valley, figures began to appear along the pathways, tall, elegant beings whose skin shimmered with the same ethereal glow as Zephyra's. They moved with fluid grace, but Marcus could sense the tension in their postures, the way their hands drifted toward weapons that seemed to grow from their very bodies like extensions of themselves. Word of their approach spread faster than their footsteps, carried on musical voices that spoke in harmonies rather than single tones. "They're afraid," Zephyra murmured, her hand tightening on his arm. "Not of you, but of what your presence means. Change frightens even my people." The first real challenge came at the city's outer gate, where a contingent of guards waited in formation. Their leader, a being whose skin blazed with patterns of gold and deep blue, stepped forward with the unmistakable bearing of military authority. The conversation that followed was rapid and heated, conducted in the musical language of Zephyra's people, while Marcus stood awkwardly to one side, understanding nothing but the emotional undercurrents. Finally, Zephyra turned to him with exhaustion, clear in her violet eyes. "Commander Vilex questions my judgment. He believes you are a spy, or perhaps an assassin who has somehow enchanted me." Her mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. "He has ordered your immediate execution." Marcus felt his muscles tense, his hand instinctively moving toward the sidearm he still carried. But Zephyra stepped between him and the guards, and when she spoke again, her voice carried an authority that made the very air seem to vibrate. The patterns on her skin flared brilliant white, and Marcus realized he was seeing her true power for the first time. Not just rank or title, but something deeper, something that made the guards step back despite their obvious reluctance. "Have invoked the right of sanctuary," she explained as they were finally allowed to pass. "You are under my personal protection now." "But Marcus," she paused, meeting his eyes with an intensity that made his chest tighten. "There will be a trial of intentions. The council will judge whether you are worthy of trust. And if I'm not?" Her silence told him everything he needed to know. The path to the city's heart wound through districts that showcased the impossible beauty of Zephyra's people. Gardens bloomed with flowers that sang in the wind, their petals shifting through colors that had no names in any human language. Fountains defied gravity, their waters flowing upward in spirals that caught and reflected light in mesmerizing patterns. Architecture seemed to grow rather than be built, with buildings that pulsed gently like living things. But it was the people themselves who truly took Marcus's breath away. Children played games that involved manipulating light with their bare hands, while artisans crafted objects that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human eyes could perceive. Everyone they passed stopped to stare at the strange pair, their wounded leader and the alien warrior who carried her. But Marcus noticed that the looks weren't entirely hostile. Curiosity warred with fear in those luminous eyes. And he caught more than one gesture that looked almost hopeful. "They've never seen anything like you," Zephyra said softly. "For generations we have been alone among the stars. The idea that intelligence might take a different form." She trailed off, then added, "Some see it as proof that the universe is larger than we imagined." The Palace of Lumenspire occupied the city's highest point, its spires reaching toward the heavens with surfaces that seemed to be made of crystallized light itself. As they climbed the winding approaches, Marcus caught glimpses of the city spread below them, a living mandala of beauty and purpose that made his chest ache with something he couldn't name. Inside the palace, they were met by a figure whose presence seemed to dim the very air around them. Tall even by the standards of Zephyra's people, with skin that held the deep blue-black of space between stars, the being radiated authority that made Marcus's military training sit up and take notice. This was someone used to being obeyed without question. "High Counselor Nethys," Zephyra said formally, offering a gesture that looked like a bow crossed with a dance. "I present Marcus Vale, who carried me from the battlefield when all others had fallen." Nethys studied Marcus with eyes like chips of frozen starlight, and when they spoke, their voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in his bones. Zephyra translated, "The High Counselor asks why a human would risk his life for one of us. They wish to know what you hope to gain." Marcus considered his answer carefully. Everything depended on this moment, not just his life but possibly the future relationship between their peoples. "Tell them," he said finally, "that I didn't save Zephyra because she was alien or human. I saved her because she was hurt and I'm a medic, it's what I do." The translation seemed to surprise Nethys, who exchanged rapid words with other council members that had appeared as if from the walls themselves. Marcus caught fragments, words that sounded like honor and purpose, mixed with others that he suspected were less complimentary. "The council is divided," Zephyra murmured. "Some see your actions as proof of human decency. Others believe it's elaborate deception." She paused, then added with a slight smile that lit up her entire face, "Counselor Wraith has suggested that no human could be clever enough for such a complex deception." Despite everything, Marcus found himself chuckling. Glad to know some things are universal. The trial of intentions, when it came, was unlike anything in Marcus's experience. He stood in the center of a vast chamber whose walls seemed to extend infinitely in all directions, surrounded by beings whose very presence made the air shimmer with power. But instead of questions or challenges, they simply watched. And as they watched, Marcus felt something probing at the edges of his mind, not invasive or violent, but persistent in a way that made his skin crawl. "They're reading your intentions," Zephyra explained from her position at the council table, her voice somehow reaching him despite the distance. "Not your thoughts were not that intrusive, but the patterns beneath them, the truth of who you are." Marcus forced himself to remain still, to let them see whatever they needed to see. He thought of the battlefield, of the choice he'd made, to save her. He thought of the long journey, of conversations shared in the darkness, of the way her laughter had sounded when he'd told her about Earth's ridiculous obsession with small, furry animals. He thought of the moment he'd realized he cared about her, really cared, in a way that had nothing to do with duty or honor, and everything to do with the light in her eyes when she smiled. The probing stopped abruptly, and the chamber filled, with whispered harmonies as the council conferred. Marcus caught Zephyra's eye and saw hope there, mixed with something that looked suspiciously like affection. Finally, High Counselor Nethys rose and spoke in their musical language. Saphira translated, her voice carefully neutral. The Council finds your intentions pure, Marcus Vale. You are granted the status of honored guest, with all protections that entails. She paused, then added with barely contained excitement, They've also voted to begin formal communications with your people's government. You've opened a door that has been closed for too long. The celebration that followed was a sensory overload of music, light, and flavors that Marcus's human palate could barely process. But what struck him most was how quickly he found himself accepted, not as a curiosity or a former enemy, but as simply another being worthy of respect. Children approached him with the fearless curiosity that seemed universal, while adults engaged him in halting conversations that bridged the gap between their languages with gestures and shared laughter. It was late in the evening when Zephyra found him on one of the palace's many balconies, staring out at the city lights that painted the night in impossible colors. She'd changed from her travel-stained robes into something that looked like woven starlight, and the sight of her made his breath catch in his throat. "Regrets?" she asked softly, joining him at the balcony's edge. "About saving you?" "Never." He turned to face her fully, studying the patterns that danced across her skin in the soft light. "About everything that's happened since? I'm still processing." She laughed, a sound like distant bells. "You've changed the course of 2 civilizations with a single act of kindness. That would be overwhelming for anyone." "Is that what I did?" Marcus asked. It felt simpler at the time. Just right. Perhaps that's what makes it so remarkable. Zephyra stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the strange, sweet scent that seemed to be uniquely hers. "The Council has asked me to serve as our people's first ambassador to humanity, to travel to your worlds and begin the work of building bridges." Marcus felt his heart skip. That's incredible. You'll be perfect for it." "I was hoping," she said, her voice suddenly uncertain in a way he'd never heard before, "that you might consider serving as humanity's ambassador to us. The Council trusts you, and my people have grown fond of their strange human friend." Marcus stared at her, the implications hitting him like a physical blow. "Stay here? Permanently?" "The choice is yours," Zephyra said quickly. "I would never presume to ask you to abandon your own people. But Marcus..." She reached up and touched his face, the same gesture she'd made in that cave so many days ago. "You saved more than my life on that battlefield. You saved my faith in the possibility of peace." Looking into her eyes, Marcus realized that the choice had been made long ago, somewhere between that first moment of trust and the countless small kindnesses they'd shared along the way. Earth would always be his birthplace, but home was wherever she was. "Well," he said, covering her hand with his own, "I guess I've always been partial to long-term assignments." Her smile was radiant enough to put the city's lights to shame, and when she kissed him, Marcus tasted starlight and possibility, the promise of a future neither of their peoples could have imagined. Below them, Lumenspire pulsed with gentle light, a beacon of hope in a universe that had suddenly become infinitely larger and more wonderful. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, languages to learn, customs to navigate, the delicate work of building trust between species that had been enemies. But tonight, standing on a balcony between the stars with the woman he'd carried from darkness into light, Marcus Vale allowed himself to believe in the impossible, that love could indeed bridge any divide, even the vast space between worlds.